And tonight on 7 UpFront, we are taking a close look at that $2 trillion being spent. Aaron Call, Director of Debate for the University of Michigan, joining us now tonight. Welcome, Aaron. We appreciate you being here.
It's great to be with you.
All right, let's precede this discussion on President Biden's address to a joint session of Congress tonight. Tell me your thoughts to start with.
Yes, it's a very unusual address. Normally these happen in February, going back to Ronald Reagan in 1981, but this has been delayed for several months because he wanted the first part of his economic plan, the coronavirus stimulus legislation to pass and people to get the $1,400 checks. And so he wanted that before he gave this. So it's much delayed, and just the optics are much different. There's only 200 people as opposed to the 1,600 that are normally there. Speaker Pelosi and Vice President Kamala Harris behind him will be wearing masks the entire time. So really the first and certainly modern address in the midst of a once in a generation pandemic. And so it's going to just be a totally different scene than we're normally used to each year.
Right, and mentioning Speaker Pelosi and the Vice President, two women for the first time behind the president during this address. So he's planning on unveiling that $1.8 billion plan. That expands access to education, health care, and helps with the cost of child care. This will bring that total cost of that plan to around $4 trillion. How will all of this sit with the American people?
Yeah, so it's certainly a mixed bag, and the $4 trillion on top of almost $2 trillion that passed with the initial coronavirus legislation. And so in general, a lot of the programs are very popular. They poll 60, 70% on things like education and infrastructure, roads and bridges, airports, especially here in Michigan, will be very popular. But the rub is how you're going to pay for it. And he has some ideas about increasing taxes on the wealthy and investors, capital gains tax, trying to beef up the enforcement powers of the Internal Revenue Service to get unclaimed taxes that aren't paid every year. But it's going to be tough because the country already has a debt and deficit problem. But the plans are mostly popular, and the Democrats do have a narrow majority in the House and Senate. So because of the reconciliation process, as long as the president can give a persuasive speech and keep the Democrats together, then another part of his major economic agenda can pass by, again, probably the most slimmest of margins.
And you said it. I mean, we do know Michigan roads and bridges are a mess. How do you think that bipartisan support will shake out on that hefty price tag?
It's tough because it's the incentives these days. The country is so polarized, and people in Congress now are more worried about a primary than a general election. And so it takes a lot of political courage to step across the aisle. And in the Senate, if there was a filibuster to legislation that requires 10 Republicans to jump to the other side, and just looking at the first piece of legislation, it passed on a party line vote. And so I just don't expect to get buy-in from Republicans on this because raising taxes are controversial, especially with the 2022 midterms coming up. And so I think there's going to be an outreach, and the speech will likely try to do that. But at the end of the day, in the next weeks or months following after, it's just as likely that the second part of his economic agenda will be at a party line vote, just like the first, unless there's a major surprise.
Yeah, and you spoke briefly earlier mentioning taxing the wealthiest Americans to pay for this pricey plan. Do you think that will happen?
It's going to be tough because taxes are controversial. There's many moderate senators that there's no room to lose, people like Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. And so probably just like with everything, it'll be a compromise. If it's at 29%, the corporate tax at 26%. And so maybe something in the middle, but certainly not to the extent that will be totally required to pay for the legislation and where President Biden would like. But you always throw out a marker and then negotiate to get to at least something that's acceptable to his party.
Well, we thank you so much for your time tonight. Aaron Call, Director of Debate at the University of Michigan. Appreciate your insight.
Anytime. Thank you.